Margaret sat at her sprawling mahogany desk, the New York skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of her luxurious office. The city buzzed with life, but within the walls of her corporate sanctuary, she was insulated from it all. The only sound was the rhythmic tapping of her fingers on the keyboard as she typed out the final touches on a presentation that would secure yet another lucrative deal for her company. She had built her empire on ambition, resilience, and an unyielding work ethic. But as the golden hour bathed the office in a warm glow, a sense of emptiness lingered in the air. "Margaret, would you like to review the quarterly numbers before the meeting?" Her assistant, Clara, called from the doorway, a stack of papers clutched in her hands. "No, Clara, I trust your judgment," Margaret replied curtly, not bothering to look up from her screen. She could sense Clara's hesitation, but the young woman quickly composed herself and retreated, leaving Margaret alone once more. She reveled in her solitude, the silence a comforting blanket against the chaos she had chosen to leave behind. As she continued to scan through slides, her mind drifted to thoughts of the impending business deal. It was a crucial contract, one that could elevate her status in the corporate world. But the more she thought about it, the more it felt like a hollow victory. She had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, sacrificing relationships and personal connections in the process. Friends had faded into mere acquaintances, and family ties had become strained. Though she had everything she could ever want, money, power, success, the emotional detachment gnawed at her insides. The city outside her window was alive with the spirit of the holiday season. Streets were adorned with twinkling lights, and shop windows displayed festive decorations that beckoned passers-by. But Margaret remained oblivious to the joy around her, her world confined to the decisions she made in boardrooms and conference calls. The laughter of children playing in the snow, the scent of roasted chestnuts wafting through the air, and the cheerful melodies of carolers were all lost on her. Finally, she glanced at the clock, its hands nearing 6. With a sigh, she saved her work and stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her tailored blazer. Stepping into the elevator, she braced herself for the cacophony of the streets below. The glass doors slid open, and she was immediately enveloped by the cold air, a stark contrast to the warmth of her office. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck and began her walk home. The streets were bustling with people, all of them caught up in the holiday spirit. Couples strolled hand in hand, children laughed as they raced each other in the snow, and families gathered around trees adorned with lights. Margaret should have felt something, joy, nostalgia, perhaps, but all she felt was an overwhelming sense of disconnection. She maneuvered through the crowd, her footsteps brisk and purposeful, her mind racing with thoughts of the business deal that awaited her. "Excuse me, ma'am?" a small voice piped up, startling her from her thoughts. She turned to see a scruffy boy no older than 10, standing on the corner with a stack of handmade Christmas cards in front of him. His clothes were patched and worn, and his bright eyes sparkled with enthusiasm despite the frigid air. "Would you like to buy a Christmas card?" he asked, his voice hopeful. Margaret glanced down at the cards, their colorful designs a stark contrast to the monochrome world she inhabited. "No, thank you," she replied dismissively, her tone colder than she intended. She took a step to move past him, but something made her pause. The boy's eyes held a strange familiarity, a spark that tugged at something deep within her. She studied him for a moment longer, taking in the way he clutched the cards tightly as if they were his lifeline. The bustling crowd around them blurred into the background as she felt an inexplicable pull toward him, as if the universe had conspired to bring her to this very moment. "Please, ma'am, they're only $1 each," he said, undeterred by her initial rejection. "They're really nice. My sister helped me make them." Margaret felt a pang in her chest, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, compassion. "Why are you selling cards out here in the cold?" she asked, trying to mask the vulnerability creeping into her voice. "Because we need money for food," he replied simply, his expression earnest, "and I like making people smile." For the first time in a long while, Margaret's heart softened. She looked around at the bustling crowd, the laughter, the joy, and yet here was this boy, radiating resilience amidst the chaos. "What's your name?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her usual aloofness. "Ethan," he said proudly, puffing out his chest. "What's yours?" "Margaret," she replied. surprised at how her name felt on her tongue, almost foreign after so many years of being called boss or mom in the corporate world. "Nice to meet you, Margaret," Ethan beamed, his enthusiasm infectious. "Do you want to see my cards?" Margaret hesitated, a part of her wanting to retreat back into the safety of her corporate bubble. But another part felt drawn to the boy, as if he held a key to a door she had long since sealed shut. "All right," she said, allowing herself to lean a little closer. Ethan spread the cards out on the snowy pavement, showcasing his artwork. They were vibrant and whimsical, filled with images of snowmen, Christmas trees, and twinkling stars. "I made all of these. I love drawing," he said, his eyes shining with pride. As she looked down at the cards, Margaret was suddenly overwhelmed by a wave of nostalgia. The colors stirred memories of her own childhood, of simpler times filled with laughter and creativity. It was a time before the weight of expectations and responsibilities had settled on her shoulders, before she had become the formidable businesswoman she was today. "Do you like them?" Ethan asked, snapping her back to the moment. "Yes, I do," she admitted, her voice softening. "You're very talented, Ethan." "Thanks," he said, his smile widening. "I want to be an artist when I grow up, maybe even have my own gallery one day." Margaret felt a strange longing as she listened to his dreams. She had once had dreams of her own, long before ambition and fear had clouded her vision. "You can do anything you set your mind to," she said, her words surprising even herself. "But you have to believe in yourself." Ethan nodded earnestly, but his gaze drifted to the ground. "Sometimes it's hard to believe when you don't have much," he murmured, the weight of his situation evident in his voice. Margaret felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to say something comforting, to assure him that things would get better. But the truth was she had never learned how to navigate such matters herself. She was a master of business deals, not of hope or emotional connection. Just then, a gust of wind swept through the street, sending a chill down her spine. As she turned to leave, a strange sense of urgency gripped her. She looked back at Ethan, who was carefully gathering his cards, his small fingers trembling against the cold. "Ethan," she called softly, her heart racing. I'll think about it. Maybe I'll come back and buy a card tomorrow." "Really?" he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up once more. "That would be awesome. I hope you do." Margaret smiled, a genuine expression that felt foreign yet uplifting. "Take care, Ethan. Stay warm." With that, she turned and walked away, the sound of his cheerful voice fading into the bustling city noise. As she navigated through the crowd, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had shifted within her. The encounter with Ethan lingered in her mind, a spark of connection that stirred emotions she had long buried. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, a reminder that perhaps there was more to life than numbers and profits. And as she stepped into the warmth of her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring something unexpected. Margaret stood frozen, her heart pounding, as she gazed at Ethan. The cold wind whipped around her, but she barely felt it. There was something in the boy's eyes, an uncanny familiarity that tugged at the edges of her memory. She had seen those bright, determined eyes before, a long time ago, in a different world, in a different life, that she had all but forgotten. Ethan, oblivious to the storm of emotions brewing within Margaret, continued to laugh and chatter with the few passers-by who had stopped to look at his handmade Christmas cards. His laughter rang out like a bell, breaking through her carefully constructed facade of emotional detachment. Margaret felt a sharp pang of nostalgia, a bittersweet ache that reminded her of simpler times, times she had buried deep beneath layers of corporate ambition and emotional neglect. "Lady, do you want to buy a card?" Ethan's voice broke through her reverie. He held up a card adorned with a vibrant drawing of a snowman, its eyes made from shiny buttons. A small, hopeful smile danced on his lips, and Margaret felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crack. "No, she started to say, but the words caught in her throat. A strange impulse surged through her, urging her to stay, to learn more about this boy. She took a step closer, drawn in by his infectious spirit, yet terrified of the connection she felt. "I make them myself," Ethan continued, his voice bright and earnest. "They're only $1. You can't find anything this special at the store." He beamed up at her, his cheeks flushed from the cold. Margaret forced a smile, but it felt foreign on her lips. "They're lovely, Ethan. Really." She could hardly bring herself to say his name, yet it felt oddly comforting, as if she had known him forever. "Thanks," he replied, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "I'm saving up for a new sketchbook. My old one is all filled up." "Sketchbook?" Margaret's curiosity piqued. "You like to draw?" "Yeah, I want to be an artist when I grow up." Ethan's eyes sparkled with dreams that seemed to soar far above the grim realities of his daily life. "I'm going to paint the best pictures in the world, just you wait." The boy's unwavering determination struck a chord within Margaret. She remembered her own childhood dreams, the art classes she had loved, the colors that had once brought her so much joy. But those memories were overshadowed by the relentless march of adulthood, where dreams were often sacrificed at the altar of ambition. "I hope you do," she finally said, her voice softer now. "You should never give up on your dreams." Ethan looked at her, his gaze intense and searching. "What about you? What do you do?" Margaret hesitated, caught off guard by the directness of his question. "I'm a businesswoman," she replied, the words feeling heavy on her tongue. "I work in a big office." "What's that like?" he asked, tilting his head in genuine curiosity. "It's busy. Lots of meetings, lots of numbers." She shrugged, feeling the weight of her own words. "Not very exciting." Ethan scrunched his nose. "Sounds kind of boring. Do you get to draw any pictures?" "Not really," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't drawn in years." "Why not?" His question was innocent, yet it hit her like a ton of bricks. "I don't know," she replied, feeling an unexpected surge of vulnerability. "I guess I just got too busy. Maybe one day I'll find the time again." Ethan nodded, as if he understood more than she had intended to reveal. Margaret felt an unexpected warmth wash over her, a strange connection forming in the chilly air. "I'll tell you what," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "You should buy a card, and then you can draw something on the back. It'll be like a secret." She chuckled lightly, the sound surprising her. "A secret, huh? What kind of secret?" "The kind that only you know about," Ethan replied, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Like a treasure map." Margaret felt her heart swell with an unfamiliar warmth. For the first time in years, she found herself wanting to let go of her guarded demeanor, to embrace the joy and innocence that Ethan exuded. But just as quickly, the walls slammed back into place. I really have to go," she stammered, taking a step back. "I have a meeting." Ethan's smile faltered, and for a moment, Margaret saw a flicker of disappointment cross his face. "Okay," he said softly, "but will you come back tomorrow?" She hesitated, her mind racing. "I can't promise that." "Please?" His voice was sincere, almost pleading. "I'll save you a card." Margaret turned to leave, but something held her in place. She glanced back at Ethan, whose eyes were wide with hope. In that moment she felt the weight of her past pressing down on her, a past she had tried desperately to forget. As she walked away, Margaret felt a strange sense of loss wash over her. The laughter that had once echoed in her ears now faded into the cacophony of the bustling street. She found herself glancing back, but Ethan was already focused on the next passerby, his spirit unbroken. With each step away from the boy, the memories began to flood back. Memories of a childhood she had long buried beneath layers of success and ambition. The laughter of her own brother, the warmth of their shared dreams, and the pain of loss that had driven her to seek solace in the cold, hard world of business. Margaret shook her head, as if trying to dispel the memories, but they persisted, clawing at her heart. She had spent years building her empire, yet here she was feeling more lost than ever. Suddenly she stopped in her tracks. The resemblance was undeniable. Ethan's bright eyes, his laughter, his dreams, they mirrored her own childhood, a time when hope and innocence defined her existence. "Ethan," she whispered to herself, the name hanging in the air like a fragile promise. She felt a pull, an undeniable connection that transcended their brief encounter. What was it about this boy that stirred something deep within her? Was it merely nostalgia, or was there something more? With every step she took away from him, Margaret felt the walls of her carefully constructed world begin to crumble. The boy had awakened something inside her, a longing for connection, an ache for the past she had tried so hard to forget. And as she made her way through the bustling streets of New York City, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was on the brink of something monumental. A chance meeting, a fleeting moment. And yet it felt as if the universe had conspired to bring them together, to unearth the buried secrets of her heart. Margaret knew she had to confront the emotions that Ethan had stirred within her. She had to face the ghosts of her past and the dreams she had buried beneath the weight of her success. And as she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder if she would find the courage to return, to explore the connection that had begun to blossom in the unlikeliest of places. Margaret stood in her lavish apartment, the city lights twinkling like stars against the night sky. She tossed her designer coat onto a nearby chair, the fabric sliding off with a soft whisper. The encounter with Ethan lingered in her mind, a ghost haunting the corridors of her thoughts. She felt an unsettling mix of emotions, confusion, nostalgia, and an inexplicable urge to understand the boy who had unwittingly stirred something deep within her. With a sigh, she wandered into her living room, her gaze drifting toward the polished wooden shelves lined with awards, accolades, and photographs of her past achievements. Yet, it was the small, inconspicuous box on the bottom shelf that caught her attention. Dust had settled over it, a sign of neglect, much like the feelings she had buried long ago. As she knelt before the shelf, her heart raced. The box was filled with photographs, a nostalgic collection of her childhood that she had long since tucked away. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers brushing the lid, as if fearing the memories that would flood back. Finally, she opened it, the scent of aged paper wafting into the air. Flipping through the photographs, Margaret's heart tightened. There she was, a young girl with pigtails and a wide smile, standing beside a boy who looked astonishingly like Ethan. His face was round and innocent, eyes sparkling with mischief. The resemblance was uncanny. She felt as if she was staring into a mirror, reflecting a part of her life she had tried so hard to forget. "Who are you?" she whispered to the photograph, her voice barely audible. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she studied the boy's face. Memories began to unravel, each one a thread in the tapestry of her past. She could almost hear the laughter echoing in her mind, the sound of children playing in a sun-drenched yard, the scent of fresh grass and warm cookies wafting from the kitchen. As she flipped the pages, a particular photograph caught her breath. It was a family portrait, her parents, her younger self, and that boy. They were all smiling, their faces radiating joy. But as Margaret gazed at the image, a dark shadow loomed over her heart. The joy in that moment was fleeting, a stark contrast to the pain that followed. Suddenly, memories flooded her mind, vivid and haunting. She remembered the day her life changed forever. The phone call had come in the middle of the night, shattering the fragile peace of their home. Her parents' voices, fraught with fear, spoke of a car accident that had taken their lives. The world had spun on its axis, leaving Margaret and her brother Ethan, though she had never known his name, lost in a void of grief. "Ethan," she breathed, the name slipping from her lips like a whispered prayer. She recalled the day she had been sent away, the day she had chosen to sever ties with her past. In a bid to escape the pain, she had buried her childhood, her family, and the brother she never got to say goodbye to. The decision felt like a betrayal now, an act of cowardice that had haunted her for years. "Why did I forget?" she whispered into the silence of her apartment, her voice trembling with emotion. She stood up abruptly, the photographs clutched tightly in her hand. The weight of her past felt heavier than ever, pressing down on her chest like a suffocating blanket. Margaret paced the room, her mind racing. She felt a desperate need to understand the connection she felt with Ethan, the boy selling Christmas cards. What had he been through? Did he remember her? The thought of reconnecting with him was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She could not shake the feeling that he held the key to her past, a link to the family she had lost. She glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands ticking away the seconds. Time was slipping through her fingers like sand, and she knew she had to act. The thought of returning to that street, of facing Ethan again, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. But deep down, She felt an undeniable pull, a longing to bridge the gap that had formed over the years. As the night deepened, she found herself standing by the window, looking out at the bustling streets below. The city was alive with the sounds of laughter and holiday cheer, a stark contrast to the turmoil within her. People rushed by, their arms laden with gifts and their faces lit with joy, but in her heart she felt an emptiness that could not be filled by material possessions. "Tomorrow," she resolved, determination hardening her resolve, "I will find him." The next day dawned with a crispness that invigorated her spirit. Margaret dressed meticulously, her professional demeanor masking the vulnerability that lingered beneath the surface. As she stepped into the bustling streets of New York City, the crowd felt different. The festive decorations that had previously seemed like mere distractions now felt like a beacon of hope. With each step, her heart raced. She navigated through throngs of holiday shoppers, the air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts and hot cocoa. As she approached the corner where she had first seen Ethan, anticipation and trepidation battled within her. What if he wasn't there? What if he had moved on, leaving her with nothing but the remnants of a nostalgic memory? But as she rounded the corner, there he was. Ethan was perched on a small stool, his collection of handmade Christmas cards displayed in front of him. His hair was tousled, and his eyes sparkled with the same youthful exuberance that had captivated her the day before. Margaret felt her heart swell at the sight of him, an inexplicable connection drawing her closer. "Ethan!" she called, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. The boy looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to curiosity as he recognized her. "Hey, you came back!" he exclaimed, a bright smile spreading across his face. Margaret approached, her heart pounding. "I needed to see you again. Can we talk?" Ethan nodded, a hint of suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Sure. What do you want to talk about?" As they settled on the curb, Margaret took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. You reminded me of someone very important from my past." "Who?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "A brother," she replied softly, the word hanging between them like a fragile thread. "I lost him a long time ago." Ethan's eyes widened, and for a fleeting moment an understanding passed between them. What happened? With a heavy heart, Margaret began to share her story, the tragedy that had torn her family apart, the memories she had locked away. As she spoke, she watched Ethan's expression shift from curiosity to empathy. She felt as if she were peeling back the layers of her own heart, exposing the raw wounds she had tried to conceal. "I didn't know how to cope," she admitted. "So, I ran away. I've spent so many years trying to forget. But now I want to remember." Ethan listened intently, his young face reflecting a wisdom beyond his years. "I get that," he said quietly. "Sometimes it feels like it's better to forget." "Yes," Margaret replied, her voice cracking. "But forgetting doesn't heal the pain. It only buries it deeper." As they sat there, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of the city, Margaret realized that this moment was the beginning of something profound. She was no longer just a wealthy businesswoman. She was a sister, a seeker of truth, and perhaps a bridge to healing for both of them. "Ethan," she said, her voice steadying with newfound resolve, "I want to know you. I want to be part of your life." His eyes sparkled with something she hadn't expected, hope, and in that instant, Margaret felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble, opening her up to the possibility of love, connection, and the family she had longed for in the shadows of her past. Margaret stepped out of her sleek black sedan, the cold December air biting at her cheeks as she adjusted her scarf. The bustling streets of New York City were alive with holiday cheer, but the vibrant decorations and joyful laughter felt like a world away from her reality. With each step, she felt the weight of her unease grow heavier. Today she had returned to the spot where she had encountered Ethan, the scruffy boy whose bright eyes had haunted her thoughts since that fateful meeting. As she approached the corner, her heart raced with anticipation. She had told herself she was merely curious, that she wanted to understand the connection she felt with the boy. But deep down, She sensed it was more than curiosity. It was a longing to reconnect with a part of herself she had long buried beneath layers of ambition and emotional detachment. To her relief, there he was. Ethan stood on the same street corner, his small frame surrounded by a group of older boys. They were roughhousing, their laughter ringing in the air, but their playful demeanor quickly turned into taunts directed at him. "Look at the little artist. You think anyone's going to buy your stupid cards?" One of them sneered, shoving Ethan lightly with his shoulder. Margaret felt a surge of protectiveness wash over her, surprising herself. Without thinking, she strode forward, her heels clicking against the pavement, a sharp contrast to the laughter that echoed around her. "Hey!" she called out, startling the boys, who turned to face her with a mix of surprise and disdain. "Why don't you leave him alone?" The boys exchanged glances, taken aback by the sudden intervention of this well-dressed woman. "What's it to you?" another boy shot back, crossing his arms defiantly. Margaret felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, but she steeled her resolve, meeting their gazes with unwavering determination. "It's got everything to do with me. He's just trying to sell his cards," she asserted, pointing at Ethan, who stood wide-eyed, caught between embarrassment and admiration for the woman defending him. "You should be ashamed of yourselves." The boys mumbled under their breaths, clearly not accustomed to being challenged, and eventually turned away, their laughter fading into the distance. Margaret turned to Ethan, who was still staring at her, a mix of gratitude and confusion in his bright eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think anyone would help me." Margaret knelt to meet his gaze, her heart swelling with an unfamiliar warmth. "No one deserves to be treated that way. You're doing something brave by selling your art. What's your name again?" "Ethan," he replied, a shy smile breaking through his initial discomfort. "I'm trying to buy art supplies with the money I make." "Art supplies?" Margaret's interest piqued. "What kind of art do you want to create?" Ethan's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as he spoke. "I want to draw and paint. I love to make pictures of the city and the people in it. One day, I want to have my own gallery." Margaret's heart twisted at his dreams. In that moment, she saw a glimpse of herself, of the passion and ambition she had once felt before life's harsh realities dulled her spirit. "That's incredible, Ethan. You have a real talent," she encouraged, feeling a pull toward this boy who seemed to ignite a fire within her that had long been extinguished. "Do you really think so?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. "I do," she replied, nodding earnestly. "I can see it in your eyes. You have a passion for art that most people only dream of." The boy beamed, the shadows of the previous encounter lifting as he warmed to her encouragement. "Sometimes it feels like no one cares about my art, you know. But I keep trying because I want to make something beautiful." Margaret's heart ached at his honesty. She had spent years building her empire, focusing on profits and success. Yet here stood a boy who found value in beauty and creativity amid life's struggles. "Creating something beautiful is worth every effort," she said, her voice softening. "Tell me about your drawings." Ethan's face lit up as he launched into a detailed description of his favorite pieces, one depicting the skyline of New York at sunset, with hues of orange and purple blending together, and another showing a bustling street filled with people, each character uniquely crafted. His words flowed with passion, and Margaret found herself hanging on every syllable. As the conversation continued, Margaret felt an inexplicable bond forming between them. "You know, when I was younger, I used to draw too," she confessed, surprising herself with her vulnerability. "But I stopped when I got older. I guess I lost sight of what really mattered." Ethan listened intently, his eyes wide with fascination. "Why did you stop?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I thought I had to grow up and be serious," she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "I thought success meant leaving things like art behind. But now I see—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I see that it's important to hold on to those dreams, no matter how silly they seem." Ethan nodded, his earnest expression reflecting a wisdom beyond his years. "You can always start again. It's never too late to make something beautiful." Margaret felt a lump form in her throat, his words resonating deeply within her. "You're right," she said with newfound determination. Maybe it's time I rediscovered that part of myself. Do you want to draw with me sometime? Ethan suggested, a hopeful grin spreading across his face. I could show you how to make cards like mine. We could make a whole bunch and sell them together. The thought sent a thrill through Margaret. I'd love that, she replied, excitement bubbling within her. I could use a little creativity in my life. As they talked, the world around them faded away, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of connection. The noise of the city, the chilly wind, the festive decorations, all of it felt distant and unimportant. Here, in this moment, they were two dreamers sharing stories, each igniting a spark in the other. Margaret glanced at her watch, realizing time had slipped away. I should get going, she said reluctantly, feeling a pang of disappointment. But I'll come back tomorrow. We can draw together, right? Ethan's face brightened. Yeah, I'll bring my sketchbook. You won't regret it. With a smile, she waved goodbye, her heart lighter than it had been in years. As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was beginning to change. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope, a stirring of creativity and the promise of unexpected friendship. The bustling city continued around her, but inside, she was transforming. In the days to come, she would not only reconnect with her past, but also embrace the future she had long denied herself. Margaret knew she was on the brink of something beautiful, and it all began with a boy named Ethan and the dreams they both dared to share.